Efficiency Unlocked is hosted by two tech-savvy physicians and dear friends of mine, Drs. Adam Karu and Dale Gold, who are experts in using technology to automate routine tasks and increase efficiency in everyday and business life. Let's see what they have for us today.
In that 3-week pneumonia, there's a lot of anxiety in the patient. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of, new information that's coming in. Like, a lot of this is reserved for that 15-minute in-person conversation. So I think you just need to redesign how we've thought of primary care. We thought of it as it's a relationship with the doctor. But I'm well, let's reframe that to patients have problems and we're there to support them throughout their problem, no matter what type of communication we're using. That changes the whole fee-for-service business model.
That was Jay Parkinson. Jay has been designing experiences in healthcare for 18 years. He's the pioneer and OG of virtual primary care. And there's currently over 500,000 people in the US receiving care in the practices he's built over the years.
At the same time, it's interesting because if this becomes too data entry, the doc's not gonna like it. You gotta almost design it so that it feels like they're interacting with patients, I think. And that's where I've been putting a lot of effort into it is gosh, if this is data labeling, that's gonna be just boring as boring gets, If this is just chart reviews, that's gonna be super boring too. So again, how do you make this meaningful to the docs? And a lot of that is interesting ways to interact with the case.
That was Jay talking about Automate Clinic, his newest venture. They partner with AI companies to make their models smarter and more effective by embedding real-world clinical insights into the development loop. We will get into that and a whole lot more in this episode. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Jay Parkinson. All right, welcome to this week's episode of NerdMD's Efficiency Unlocked. I'm super happy to have our guest this week that I just introed, Jay Parkinson, someone who I had been following for many, many years. When he was doing one of his past projects and enterprises. And I got a chance to spend some time with him recently towards the end of 2024 for a few days and got to know him better. So now I get to have him on the show and you all get to learn more about Jay. Welcome to the show, Jay.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You bet. So, I think I always like to start talking about kind of the person and so it's this first part, I think for some guests is a little bit maybe the uncomfortable part when people don't like talking about themselves. But I really want you to share, kind of what you've done in your medicine career. I think, truly if there's a pioneer of doing early, call it combination of digital health, kind of atypical, kind of primary care type practice. It's been you. And I just think that's so cool that you were so ahead of the curve. And I think we're at a place right now too, where we're so ahead of, we're trying to kind of see where this curve is going to go next in this crazy AI boom. But I think you really have been called a pioneer of kind of trying to reimagine, kind of what primary care or just healthcare can be. Can you take us back to kind of what originally drove you to start these things, or at least thinking in this way?
Sure. Oh gosh, it's a funny word to say pioneer, but I guess somebody had to do it first. And I've been sort of fortunate in that I've had a couple of firsts and it's just fun, it's kind of what drives me. I did a residency in peds and then went to Hopkins to do preventive medicine residency. And at Hopkins, it was 2005 to 2007. I was really into Flickr. And, Flickr was one of the early kind of Web 2.0 companies. And I was a photographer and I was I'm pretty good. And, that was the first entry point for me to be wow, the internet's a weird, cool thing. You could post something and people comment on it and it affects their lives and that sort of thing. And I was just wow, all right. As a doctor, you're you can see how people are communicating differently. And so, it was at that point too that I was like, let's see, Peter Provenos was one of my mentors there, who was the guy that created the surgical checklist. Mm-hmm. And he was like, everything's a process, man, and if you don't follow a process, people die, And I've always had this like visual aesthetic to me, I think, and I've been interested in like what things look like and feel like. And I was like, well, what if healthcare was a process, and if you design it really well, you can make it pretty like elegant for people. And so that was like, honestly, his thinking, like his introduction to like Lean Six Sigma and stuff like that was like the beginning of like, well, healthcare is a process, especially from the patient's perspective. And so my last day of residency was June 30th, 2007. And if y'all remember, June 29th was when the iPhone came out. And so it was just fortuitous. It was just crazy that like, gosh, now you have a computer in your pocket. The App Store wouldn't come out for another 2.5 years, right? So there wasn't the concept of an app. It was basically just a browser in your pocket. So I wanted to get back to New York, and I was like, well, what if I could create a house call practice powered by my iPhone and, kind of launch it and see what happens. But I was the writer for Gawker and Gothamist to like cover healthcare. And Gawker and Gothamist were like two of the first like sort of blog turned real media empires. And, that meant like a lot of the media read Gawker and Gothamist. So Gawker and Gothamist, whenever I launched, they covered my practice. And, Seth Godin reads like Gawker, and, so does the Colbert Report, so like they blew me up, and I got about 7.5 million hits on my site. Meanwhile, like 90% of my time was focused on like just media coverage rather than like seeing patients. It was right place, right time, kind of. Also, New York City, I couldn't do this in like, some tiny little town in America. It wouldn't have like been a thing. And yeah, I mean, talking to the folks that like, made like reality shows around like house call practices, and like, that one house call practice show out in the Hamptons, like talking to them, and like, it was just really like, I don't know, it was just a weird time to be alive. But that's honestly what kicked off my career, was just the iPhone and just being like, hey, I didn't have a partner. I didn't have a family. I was 30 years old. I was young in New York. I mean, like, I always been the type of guy that, asking, why? Why does health work this way? I was that annoying kid. So it was just like a perfect little setup for me, I think. Long-winded. Sorry.
No, that's great. I mean, I think like I think it's just like, well, I'd say some people like that maybe are listening to this weren't alive when the iPhone was invented. So that would be one thing for, I guess, the younger listeners. But, I mean, even I was obviously right in the middle of med school, like around that, in that same time. So I was a few years behind you, and I remember that moment, and I remember like, too, I was like into tech, and I was into web design and things like that. So I was thinking about those kind of things, but I mean, how did you actually like go from like residency training to something that was so different? Because, you really are kind of groomed, like, the system of medical education, I mean, kind of grooms you towards one path. And like, obviously now the younger physicians are, I think, much more adept to like, oh, I want to practice a little, I want to like start a business, I want to do this and that, and all sorts of medical students that are starting companies. But like, that was like a pretty foreign thing for like a new grad to do that. I mean, so I'd want to dig in a little bit more. Like, what, like, did you actually see things that were like broken already just in that early part of your training, and you just thought, man, this really does need to be better, like your mentors at Hopkins?
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of credit the preventive medicine residency with like helping me understand this stuff. Preventive medicine, it's fascinating. It's there's less than 100 doctors that go through the residency per year across America. So they're kind of they're the bastard child of actual specialties, although it's one of the 29 specialties that's approved. But what's interesting is you kind of go, it's more of systems thinking. Yeah. It's more public health. It's more population health. And when I was in med school, it's funny. I had no idea what I was going to do. I knew that I did everything pediatric for every rotation in medical school. And I was like, oh man, I don't even know what I want to do. So I was set on like pediatric radiology because I'm like, it's visual, it's kind of fun. It's techie, but then it's like such a long road to get there. And I didn't want to sit in a dark room all day. So I ended up like pulling out of the match because I interviewed in radiology programs. And then just said, okay, I'm going to do peds. And then after that, I'm going to do a preventive medicine residency. And, it's just, I don't know. The challenge in pediatrics was like, I told people that like, I wasn't planning on practicing, and you don't do that in residency because you're kind of like looked at as like, well, why are you even here? So I think from day one, I've just been an outsider. So I didn't really care what the industry thought.
Yeah. I mean, what initially pulled you to go into medicine? Like even going back, to like your high school, college days or whatever. Yeah. When did you, like, what was the gravitational pull?
Oh, goodness gracious.
And it's going way back, right? Like, what were you thinking back?
Yeah, it was kind of like a biology course in senior of high school. So it that got me excited. I'm also just like a helper. I like to help people.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't think it was like a big sort of, I don't know, epiphany or anything like that. But it was, it's interesting. Whenever you're 18 and you're like, I'm going to do this, you have no idea what it's really like in terms of lifestyle. And I don't know, for me, it just like wasn't set up. I couldn't imagine myself just day in, day out, patient after patient. And it's just like not how my brain works.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a savior to like kind of always be figuring out these things that you can do that you couldn't do without your training. Like you have to do to really stay sort of like passionate.
Yeah. I mean, so I guess take us back. So iPhone just came out. I remember my first thought, I was like, this thing is so cool, but I can't afford it because I was like a broke med student. And I was actually in New York too, which is interesting. So we were there at the same time. But I do remember like thinking like, wow, this thing, like when it does start to get, different applications and like kind of like seeing it more like a computer, like the way I think Steve Jobs like kind of at least introduced kind of that inkling of that concept that was coming. I guess, yeah. I mean, can you tell, how did the first like kind of home call practice that you had? Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that. And then obviously I want to jump into what you're working on right now as well for a bunch of our discussion, but.
It was funny, man. Like I made my website on iWeb. If you guys remember that. Right?
Oh yeah, I use that too.
Totally.
Yeah.
This is pretty revolutionary at the time, right? So a month before, Google allowed you to embed a Google Calendar in a website. So that was a brand new concept too. So then I could put my schedule up on my website and people could choose, a time. And then there was a thing called Form Stack, which was like just, embeddable forms. And so those were actually new at the time too. And so, this concept of this like embed that you could put in iWeb, like I just made it myself, right? And I guess that was like, this is naive, but it was basic, it would be like, hey, somebody just scheduled an appointment and here's their information and their address. And, the forms could allow me to be like, oh, okay, somebody in like Nebraska can't make an appointment with me. It has to be within these certain zip codes. So it was just like building forms that were kind of smart. The other interesting thing I did was like, I built forms around like, what are your symptoms? And so it was just this, this massive sort of suite of forms that people could fill out. And so that meant like, I kind of knew what was going on ahead of time before I went to the house. Yeah.
Which is super helpful as a clinician.
Totally. Yeah. But the other cool thing was like, it's like this weird thing where you get to like go to people's homes in New York City and you're like, you can tell so much about people in their homes, but it's also just like, wow, the spaces that you get to see are just so wild.
Yeah. No, that made me remember I did a rotation with a primary care doc in like Midtown Manhattan. Mm-hmm. His name is George Leachaeus, and he owned like a kind of a traditional, like kind of primary care practice. He was an internist. And then, but he also had like a med spa that was like connected to it, and so he would do some of the aesthetic stuff. And then there was like facials and stuff that I think it was his wife that ran that. But it was like, when you mentioned the house calls, like he used to send me on house calls, like to some of his patients. He'd be like, okay, go, here's the address. He's like, there's a doorman. So just tell him while you're there. He's like, and then I'd bring all my little like blood supplies with me, my tubes, and like, and I'd go see these people. And then I'd call him, cause he'd be like, call me when you get there. Tell me how bad they look. And so I was like his like eyes, on the house call. And meanwhile, he's like taking like 2 appointments at the same time. I feel like he was, I don't know, he probably saw like 45 patients a day. It was insane. But it was interesting going to these people's homes, like, and they were so appreciative of it. And like, it's so funny because house calls have been around for so long, right? I mean, like our parents and grandparents had some form of, that was healthcare. And it's like, now it's like we're doing like digital house calls, right? Like, I mean, I had an appointment with a patient this morning, a new mom of second child, baby's sitting on her lap. I could see the toddler in the background, playing, and, we're having a visit about her concern, that she can't make it to the doctor's office. So it's like, it's interesting. It's not, a lot has changed and not a lot has changed,
totally.
In the grand scheme of things.
I mean, healthcare, all it is communication, right? So it was just kind of communicating in someone's house versus online or whatever. But it was also the place that I realized that like the job of a doctor isn't always to like treat and heal you. It's to navigate you. It's like, well, I can't help you with this particular thing, but like, I know exactly who can. And so it was really fun too, because part of this like thing that I built back then was like, okay, if I'm going to refer you out, like who am I going to refer you to? They kind of have to be on brand. They have to be cool, And so that was like part of the project and the practice was, well, let's go meet all these like really cool doctors and like say, hey, I'm Jay, and I want to send you patients. Like one of those led to, I don't know if you guys have ever seen like Mad Men, but Mad Men has this like dentist in like the top of the Chrysler building, and he's like actually like the president of the like Art Deco Society of America, and so like I heard about that and like I got to go meet this guy. So that's who I like sent like the dental situations to, and then so people would like go sit like in one of those like the windows of the Chrysler building, like with one of those big gargoyles like right outside. And it's just like such an experience.
That's super cool.
Yeah. So it was fun.
Yeah, no, that's super fun. Well, I want to talk about Automate, and that's your newest venture that I believe just recently you kind of, I guess more publicly kind of announced and launched, but I guess my take on it, and then I obviously want to hear your thought process, is like, it seems like it's kind of like the natural evolution of a lot of the things that you've done in the past. And, but yeah, what was the tipping point to inspire you to start that? And obviously you can tell us a little bit about more what it's about. And like, yeah, the problem that you're really hoping to solve with it.
Yeah. Well, like, we skipped about 15 years.
Yeah, we did. We just jumped. I looked at the clock. I was like, okay, I got to move on to yeah. You went from like iPhone house calls to creating a cool like AI company. Like,
totally.
There's a lot in the middle. Go to Jay's LinkedIn. You can see the middle part.
Well, how about this? I'll give you short. I've built like doctor practices just online. That's been like the thing that I've done.
Yeah.
And the technology to support that, right? So, it's there's a couple 100,000 folks getting care through the care models that we've built as a team. So it's pretty fun to see that. And what I thought was, well, I'm kind of used to building doctor practices. I'm kind of used to saying, like, hey, doctors, join this practice, and you get flexibility. You get like, something that you can like get behind. And it's also intellectually challenging. So those are the three things that I'm just like, I want to build these things for doctors so that they're not stuck in exam rooms all day or at like in a video visit, like video visit after video visit. It's like the whole world is kind of moving past doctors, and like my life right now is so flexible and like where I work and how I work. And I'm just like, I'm going to bring that to doctors because it's really hard for doctors to like take part. So that's kind of like the mission statement for my career. And I'm just like, okay, well, started playing around with AI, obviously a while ago. Started playing around with like healthcare and AI. I was the chief medical officer at NABLA for, about a year. And that was whenever they were sort of getting their Copilot off the ground. Mm-hmm. NABLA is one of the AI scribes out there, but just kicking butt right now. So it's exciting to see that. So I got to see from the ground up, like, how do you build these like Copilots? And, they kept asking, to be like, hey, can you write like gold standard notes that we can use to train our models with? And I'm like, man, I haven't practiced in 17 years. I'm not the one.
You're like, I'm not the one you want to be writing gold standard notes. Yeah.
Totally not. So it's seeing how like engineers and designers interface with doctors. I thought there was just such a missing link there. And you look at like the models out there today, and they're phenomenal in the consumer sense. They are just like weirdly magical. But then once you put them in a really specific domain, they don't do too well. And so, it's just sort of like, well, what if engineers and doctors had a really like efficient, easy way to collaborate to build these models? And so, some people are like, hey, we just feed it more and more data. We don't need these pesky doctors to contribute. But I'm just like, well, that's been the strategy. And OpenAI's best model today is at like 60% accuracy in terms of like, really domain-specific expertise. Still pretty magical, obviously, but like nowhere near prime time for healthcare.
Yeah, I always talk about that with people. Like, there's like, well, isn't like, aren't like these models out there great? And I'm like, yeah, they are. I mean, and like personally for me, I mean, I just recently wrote like a post how I kind of went on this journey for my cardiac risk kind of history, and so I use ChatGPT. I put all of my data, all the results, everything in, and it's like exceptionally good, except I'm a doctor, so I can like read it with a fine tooth and kind of, I see a few things in there. I'm like, well, that's not actually right. Like even the way it's worded isn't totally right. And so I think it's just like, it's like you said, it's magical and like what it can create and what it can say, and honestly, how much it can digest. I mean, you can put in a crazy amount of data and like, you click go and it's like, it spits out, this amazing kind of summary, but you're right. It's like not there yet. Like, and it's, it's got to be used with guardrails now. And it has to, obviously if patients are using it, it's got all sorts of like things that could lead them down a path that might not be not be right. No, so that's cool. I mean, like, so I guess like, yeah, I mean, can you dive in a little bit more into, what is it called? Is it called Automate or Automate Clinic? Because I know that's the URL.
I don't know. I haven't.
Yeah. What's the brand, Jay? What do you want me to call it? Yeah. No, can you dive a little deeper? Yeah. Into, how you see it, kind of like, just, I guess maybe give some listeners like a kind of like what some of the use cases and kind of, how it's going to be used by customers.
Yeah, for sure. So we have a platform that allows us to connect to a data feed from an AI client, right? So say, for example, it's an AI scribe. Let's just keep it simple like that. The note that an AI scribe produces out in the wild, the doctor's using that scribe and says, you know what, this output is very bad. And they kind of thumbs down it or give it 1 star or whatever, right? So, you contract with the builder of this AI scribe and say, hey, give us all your thumbs downs, Those will come into our platform as a feed. And then the doctor will look at that as all the data are on the case, right? And then say, what was the problem? This is a hallucination. This was a factual inaccuracy, like that type of thing. And then basically we built this bot that allows them, the bot to act like a academic clinician. And it just starts peppering the doctor with a bunch of like, hey, how would you have thought about this? Like, why would you have thought about this? What more information would you need, to make a decision here? And so basically what you're doing is just collecting a bunch of data about how doctors think. And so that's essentially, it's essentially asking the doctor to just like do a brain dump, and then we just collect that data and then fire it back to the client. And the client then retrains their model based on that. That's one use case. The other use case is, let's talk about your model and talk about how, it's got real problems with like type 2 diabetes in like 50-year-old females, Okay, let's create a bunch of synthetic data around those particular cases and then have the doctors interact with that synthetic data to train the model about how to think about that, And then again, fire that data back to the client. They retrain the model. So it's just a really efficient way for data to come in, data to be massaged, data to delete,
Yeah. And it's being massaged by the expert, right? I mean, like that's really cool. How did you, like, what sparked the idea?
It's funny, talking to Josh Endor was a big spark there. Josh recently left SteadyMD as their chief medical officer, basically since day one. And so he was there for about 8 years or so. And, he's a connected guy. And so he was just like, man, so many companies are hitting me up to like train their models, And I was like, well, how much are they offering you? And it sounded like pretty good money. Yeah. So I'm just like, what are you using? He's like, I don't know, just like an Excel spreadsheet or something, And it's like, wow, that's the best we got right now, And so, yeah, just went poking around and, started building this platform. And then, we, it's with everything, you start off simply, and then as things evolve, you keep building and building. But at the same time, it's like, as AI is kind of like helping engineers and designers build things, like the IP of your company isn't really going to be your technology anymore because it's going to be so reproducible and easy to build. So I'm not thinking of the like tech as like anything special. I'm really thinking about like, okay, who are the doctors that want to be involved here and who are the clients that want to be involved? And that secret sauce is just connecting them. Yeah,
that's super smart. I obviously when you mentioned Nabla in the beginning, we had Alex LeBrun on here as a guest a long time ago. He's one of the first ones, and that was a great conversation. And I think I think the second part you were just saying is, it's a fair amount of companies will reach out to me and like they'll not companies, but like a lot of times it's investors or sometimes just consultants that want to like kind of up their knowledge and like just the AI scribe space and where those are going. But it's funny because I literally had a conversation last night with someone for an hour, and what you just said is exactly kind of what I said. Because they were trying to say like, oh, which one of these companies do you think is the best? And I was like, well, they're all good right now. I mean, they all have like these, like, there's these side kind of tangents, that they maybe do a little better than another customer, but or another company. But I was like, the core thing that they're doing is that is just going to get better and better and better and like easier and easier and easier to, so I'm like, I was just telling them, I was like, don't think of them as just an AI scribe. Because like right now I could probably go out and like code something that would be a pretty good AI scribe, I don't think it'd be hard and I could use it personally and maybe even sell it. But like, it's just interesting. This space, I feel like this time we're in right now, is crazy. Like it really is like this, like crazy, like what is it going to be like in 6 months, year, 3 years, 5 years? Like I have a very hard time imagining that, because of what's happened in just the last, few years.
Yeah. Well, the weird part about it is like a lot of companies in this space don't really realize they're creating a sales organization rather than like an AI scribe, So in a lot of ways, whoever builds the best sales organization is the winner. And what's a pisser about that is like the technology may not be that awesome, because it's like.
Were you listening to my conversation? I almost said those exact same words last night. No, but you're right. It is. It's, whoever has the most buzz and like, and has really good marketing and sales. which like, I mean, couldn't you argue that's like most companies have? I mean, I've heard people poop on, I know you're an Apple fan, I'm an Apple fan, but like I've heard people say that same thing about Apple, that like, oh, Apple's technology is nothing. It's all just, they're really good at sales and marketing. And I'm like, yeah, I think they're really good at that, but I don't know, maybe it's my bias but I think it's kind of similar, right? I mean, that's how companies kind of work.
I guess like, okay, I've been in like B2B sales for a long time, and B2B sales is like, it's just there's just a few people making big decisions. Whereas like Apple's got like consumers and like, are a billion people wrong type of thing, it's just like Nancy in HR deciding like, which like healthcare service is brought in as a layer on top of their health insurance. It's like, it doesn't really make me feel confident, So we'll see what happens. But I guess the reason why I brought that up is because like, even when there's probably going to be a few clear winners, even when there's going to be those winners, like they're still going to need like help to connect engineering and clinical. And so, I'm kind of banking on this being like a long shot to help you in those situations, not just at like the foundational level. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think I probably would coin you the OG nerd MD. Like you literally were doing this before. Before it's cool. It's super cool. I love like every time I talk to you, and obviously I've completely gone off the semi-planned questions because I knew our conversation would wander, but it's typically, I think, the way our conversations go. At least we're recording this one so other people can listen. So I think like, with, I guess you kind of told a little bit kind of like under the hood. Dale and I always like to ask these companies like, okay, you've told us kind of your purpose, your personal why, your business purpose, kind of, you even told us about your mission kind of behind thinking this and how Josh kind of helped spark, the idea. But like, I think like obviously the name of your company, Automate Clinic, it's catchy and it's kind of like, oh, what is this going to make my clinic better? But like, what is, like automation obviously is a little bit of a loaded word in healthcare, which I think is actually is hilarious that, like robot process automation, like RPA has been around forever. And like now we just call it agents, that like, we just changed the name and now it's like a buzzword, all over LinkedIn. But anyway, segue, getting back to kind of under the hood. So like, obviously you described it as kind of this connector between the physicians and then like this data from this company. But yeah, is there anything else you can share that's like kind of under the hood without giving away anything secretive to the group?
No, like I said, it's pretty basic, and I'm kind of proud of how basic it is. It's there's a lot of like ideas for like how we can automate like things going forward. In a lot of ways, like, hey, if a doctor is going to be correcting, say, a clinical note, like, well, you kind of want to have some really smart models, like, sort of auto-correcting it for the doctor, and then the doctor just kind of approving and making minor edits, that type of thing. So it's not just like the doctor's creating stuff from scratch. It's more about like, how do we plug into different models? And the platform allows us to do that, which is cool. That can like, populate certain things and basically take a guess as a first cut for the docs, But at the same time, it's interesting because like, if this becomes too like data entry, like docs aren't going to like it, You got to almost design it so that it feels like they're interacting with patients, I think. And that's where I've been putting a lot of effort into it, is like, gosh, if this is data labeling, that's going to be just boring as boring gets, If this is just chart reviews, that's going to be super boring too. So again, how do you make this meaningful to the docs? And a lot of that is like interesting ways to interact with the case.
Very cool.
What's cool too is like doctors, you and I both know, we like to be the smartest person in the room, and we like to prove how smart we are. And so that like bot that we've designed that kind of like challenges the doc and questions the doc is really taking advantage of that. Think of it as like an attending that's just grilling you. and you're like, I know what I'm talking about. I'm going to prove it to you. You know, like, I feel like that's an interesting engagement with data that like doesn't feel like data entry.
Yeah, no. And I always like to point out to people, like when you mentioned like data labeling, for any of the folks that aren't like kind of into the tech side of this, any of those little Google kind of captchas that you have to like click the street lights or the buses or the motorcycles or the bicyclists, like that's basically, we're all we're like data marking, you know, those pictures and training that image kind of model. They're annoying, but they're actually like serving a better purpose for identification of really fuzzy kind of crappy pictures.
And you know, the cool part about healthcare is like we're years behind, right? So like reCAPTCHA and things like that, they've been around for so long, like 15 years at least. You know? So like data labeling platforms have been around for a really long time. And that's why, again, I don't think the tech here is like the secret sauce, you know? So it's cool because, you know, Tesla, for example, like I bought my Model 3 almost 7 years ago, and I've had full autopilot, full self-driving since day one. I'm like, it's a totally different car in the last 7 years. How did they do that? You know? And if you research what they're doing and how they're doing it, it's fascinating. Obviously super smart because my car kind of drives itself. But there's a whole team of in-house experts that are there, like, you know, massaging the data and massaging the models so the models learn, right? And so again, like, this isn't like, oh, wow, this is a great idea. It's brand spanking new. It's just like, hey, Tesla and others are doing it. Let's just bring it to healthcare.
No, that's true. I mean, I think like anyone that has a Tesla knows, like, if you disengage autopilot at any point, it like now has a little microphone thing and it's like, you know, it says record what just happened. And yeah, and that's you essentially marking that video clip, you know, so they're smart people that are going back to review it can tag it, modify, you know, and ultimately feed back into the model. Yeah,
definitely. But that whole team that they have of in-house people that they've hired, you know, it's essentially the same thing, but like, you know, not every AI startup is going to have the resources that Tesla has to hire all those people full time. So it's more like, okay, but you know, what if we could make it really plug and play for them to interface with these experts, and you know, see what happens. So that's kind of the mission. Again, like, I don't know if this is a really genius thing. I think it's needed. You know?
Yeah. I mean, is anybody else doing this?
No, that's what's wild. You know, which scares the hell out of me. But
yeah, because you're like, is it not necessary, or is this really brilliant? Yeah.
Or am I too early? You know, you never know.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, I mean, I think, yeah. I mean, I think even like circling back to what we talked about in the beginning, you know, with you, like, I think, and you just mentioned it right there, like the too early concept, you know, I think that's like, I mean, that's why some people never create a company that they have an idea for, because they always think they're too early or, you know, not right. But there is like something to timing, right? I mean, you don't always have to be the first out the gate, but if you are, that's cool. But it's like, I don't know, there's so much stuff you can learn from the past and kind of take those bits and pieces, which I'm sure that I, at least from knowing you, that's the way I see you think, is you're always kind of like gathering and, you know, assembling and thinking about what you can do. But I guess it's also trouble when you're like someone that always thinks that way, is like by nature of thinking in that innovative way, you're also by nature probably going to think of things before other people do. Like, so you're going to be naturally like early. But yeah, it's interesting the way these things progress, but
yeah. And it's like coming up with ideas. I don't know. It kind of reminds me of like, I don't know, early hip hop, you know, where it's like, it's just, all it is samples. It's a ton of samples just thrown together over, you know, a new beat and new lyrics, you know? And it's like, that's how, in a lot of ways, entrepreneurship is and creating ideas is, right? It's just stealing different components and bringing it all into like one coherent kind of vision. You know? So I don't know. In a lot of ways, it feels like art, you know?
I always think about that. Like, people always will ask me, they're like, oh, what's like your ideal, you know, job at this point in your career? And I honestly think like it would be something that you could like kind of sit around with a bunch of like cool, interesting people And like, you know, the same way that like music artists, you know, sometimes create their lyrics like with their friends. You know, I've heard, my kids are fans of Tate McRae, so we've listened to some, you know, podcasts with her on it, and that's what she said she did. I mean, she was a teenager, you know, she would invite her friends over, they would like all talk and gossip, and then it would ultimately help her create lyrics for, you know, her next song. And I almost think that would be the coolest job to have, like as a physician in health tech, is like where you just got to sit around and kind of think of problems, think of how you could potentially like have solutions for those problems. And then, you know, then someone would go off and start, you know, doing it. And I don't know, that would be so fun.
But when you think about what doctoring is too, it's like you're listening for these little tidbits of like information that you can put together into a story, you know? And like, I don't know, it's almost like not that far from what doctors naturally do. I think it's just a matter of like, is that muscle, that leap from like, oh, I'm working with patients to do this, to I'm creating businesses and things like that. It's just like, that's not in our DNA. And, you know, in a lot of ways it's frowned upon in the culture.
The culture. Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree, man. It's like, you know, having that ability to just sit around and like generate ideas. I mean, I think that sounds like a wonderful job too.
Yeah. I mean, so like I guess I'll wrap with kind of these things, and then I want to do like the little nerd alert round with you. Cause you're such an interesting guy. I think you'll have good answers for the questions I have for you. But, I mean, like, what do you think is like, this is more of a meta question around kind of primary care prevention, maybe even like more precision kind of medicine type of thing. But like, what do you think is needed to like make like a significant like change in the way like healthcare is delivered from like a primary care perspective? Like, what do you think is needed for consumers, doctors, the system?
Yeah. I think one of the insights that I had over the years was like, first of all, like healthcare issues should be looked at as projects to be managed over time by a team. You know, I don't think healthcare thinks of like a pneumonia as a project to be managed, like building a website or throwing an event. You know, it's sort of like, oh, we have 15-minute conversations as needed until you're better, you know, versus like in that 3-week pneumonia, there's a lot of anxiety in the patient. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of, you know, new information that's coming in. Like a lot of this is reserved for that 15-minute in-person conversation. So I think you just need to like redesign how like we've thought of primary care. We thought of it as like it's a relationship with the doctor. But I'm like, well, let's reframe that to patients have problems and we're there to support them throughout their problem, no matter like what type of communication we're using. That changes like the whole fee-for-service business model. So you see a lot of this really interesting stuff happening in what I call like little utopias out there, like, you know, primary care practice large primary care practices that are like contracted with large employers and things like that, and do a lot of this really cool work. It just doesn't happen in the fee-for-service world. It's really hard. So, you know, we'll see. I mean, I guess in a lot of ways, man, it's like I put my 18 years in that world and I'm just like, good luck, you know?
I know. I almost wonder too, is it like, I mean, I think it'll ultimately, like any kind of business, it's ultimately the consumers of the business are going to like, I think, push it to change. I really do. Like, I mean, as much as like as doctors in like a traditional fee-for-service world, like bang their heads, you know, it's like, I think ultimately it'll be like the consumers who do change it. I mean, it's because like any industry, you know, like if the business or the model doesn't change and something else comes along that is fundamentally better, like people will gravitate to that. Right. I mean, that's what happened with Nokia and BlackBerry and, you know, like just some of the ones we can easily think of in the past in just a non-medical way.
Yeah. I think that stuff's hard though. Like, you know, when you look at the stats and it's like 5% of people spend, you know, 50% of healthcare costs, right?
Yeah.
Like, is that cohort of people going to like change? They're so deeply embedded in like the world of like hardcore healthcare. I struggle to think they're going to come out. But then there's like, the other way to frame that is like 95% of people spend, you know, 50% of healthcare. right? And that is, I think, really fascinating because that world is like, they need really basic stuff, you know? And if we can tap into like the 3 times a year they need care, if that, most of the time it's like once, and we have a really great funnel for like that 95% of people entering like a new system for primary care. I mean, you know, this should be a plug for general medicine right now, but you know,
yeah.
But that's, I think that to me is the bet or the hypothesis that this generation of primary care that's bringing up like general medicine.
Yeah. And it's almost like there needs to be almost like kind of like different styles and functions and features of a practice depending on that 5%, 95%, right? I mean, like that 5% that occupies a lot of the cost, you know, is really complex. And so they need a lot of like systems that touch them and people and like, you know, constant, like, I don't know, wearables and kind of like, they need all that stuff because you're really trying to prevent those high cost events and keeping them healthy. But you're right. Yeah. The other 95 don't need that. I mean, some people want that, but like, they don't need it. Like,
but this is where healthcare is weird because like if Uber, if you only took 1 or 2 or 3 rides a year, like Uber wouldn't exist. Like, it's just like that there's a supply and demand mismatch, and the cost of acquisition for like, you know, 1 ride a year is just insane. Right. So it's that's where healthcare gets like really weird because it's just so not well utilized. And
yeah,
really so it's wild.
Yeah. Maybe that can be our part 2 conversation down the road. We can go deep. All right. So let me rattle off this nerd alert round. These are like totally fun. And I don't give any of the guests these questions ahead of time. And so it's really just to get to know them right here at the end. But all right. So first up, Jay, do you have a favorite movie of all time?
Oh yeah. I mean, I would say No Country for Old Men.
That's a good one. That's a great one. Is there a hobby you've always wanted to pick up, but you haven't?
Like a hobby. So archery would be kind of like the big thing that I have a bow, I have a target, and my grandfather is like one of the best in America. So I need to honor that guy.
Yeah. You probably have that skill in there. It's there
for sure.
I mean, you could combine your cross country skiing with like archery and then you could make it to the Olympics. Sweet. I know obviously you mentioned you're a photographer and I think you downplayed how good of a photographer you are. Maybe I'll post one of the photos you took of me at Lucky Sage last year when I published this. But you know, I think you like music too. What's like the best concert or live performance that you've been to? And I guess second part question, do you have a favorite venue?
Yeah, great. Okay, so I would say my first concert was like the best concert. I was in 8th grade, St. Louis, Missouri. Public Enemy, Fear of a Black Planet.
That's so awesome.
The opener was Digital Underground's.
Oh yeah. With Humpty Hump. Yeah.
So who was one of the dancers in that tour for Digital Underground but Tupac? And so yeah, I got to see that.
That's my first concert was Huey Lewis and the News at the Petaluma County Fairgrounds with my parents, but that was also fun. And yeah, that's hilarious. That's awesome. I did not expect you to answer that way, but that's super cool. I love that. All right. If you could time travel, where would you go and why?
Oh man. Yeah, it's interesting. My grandfather was like a real influential guy on me, you know, and I'd love to have dinner with him when he was like 22, you know, just to go back and meet him and just be like, what you thinking about, man? You know? Yeah. So I think it's like somebody that you know, and to have like just a dinner party and have a deep conversation for a couple hours, you know, it might be disappointing, but you never know. You know?
Well, and I think it's interesting because as we age, I think if I ask that question to someone who's younger, a lot of them like say they would like to go into the future at some point, you know, and I think I used to think that way back in the day, but I think I absolutely would want to go back and, either back to family members that I didn't get a long time to be with, or even go back further, go back to like some of these like, like Einstein era kind of people and, Galileo, and like go way back, and like to be able to have like a conversation with those people, and like you couldn't tip them to what actually the world is like, in the future, but be interesting conversation. All right. I mean, last question. This is sort of like the hobby question, but it's a little different. What's something that you wish you were really good at?
That's a good question. Being able to keep really, really close relationships with people that are not like directly in my face. Like we all move around a lot, and just being able to like, you've had your besties over the years, but like just maintaining that like closeness, I think would be something that like, if I could, just kind of like wave a magic wand. And I know that's like just on me and everybody, right, to have that mentality. But
no, that's cool. It's like being intentional with like your, we don't have a Rolodex anymore, but like your address book on your phone, right? Like, it's almost like we should open that up every week or so and just like randomly scroll through and like touch, a contact and be like, oh, I'm going to reach out to that person. That's a cool idea. Cause I feel like I go through periods of time where I like I'm like, man, I haven't reached out, to my best bud from med school, that I lived with for 2 years, it's like, I should reach out to him. And then, a little while ago I texted him, and we go back and forth, ask how families are, and then, and then until next time. But no, I think that's good. It takes like, I mean, the people that I know that are good at that, it's like, I think it is very intentional, and it's like, you almost have to have like a system or something that's like kind of helping you along.
I've heard this concept called like TCS, text once a week, call once a month, see once a quarter, and I'm like, that seems really, you can't do that for like 900 people, obviously.
You'd be running all over the place.
Totally. But if it's your 20, besties, like, so that's the kind of stuff that I think about a lot. Just, just having great relationships with people that are just, they've been important throughout your life. So that's kind of what I'm focused on.
Well, Dr. Jay, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate you taking some time, and I'm excited about this next venture that you're kicking off, and I think it'll be really fun to see where it goes too, because I think that's the art of like starting these companies, is maybe even what it starts at it's not where it ultimately finishes. It's like the art of the pivot or whatever you want to call it. But no, I wish you luck, and obviously let's stay connected, and let me know how I can help you anytime too. Thank you for listening to Efficiency Unlocked, Nerd Tested, MD Approved, a Nerd MD's podcast by Drs. Adam Carew and Dale Gold.